It's Mailhot.
Yeah. All right, so we're live right now. You like the setup? I got her book. Let me see if I could get it.
Oh, yep.
Does your room have any more light in it, Shoshone?
I was trying to turn this one on, but it's
Does your room have any more light in it?
kind of bright.
It's Terese Marie Mailhot.
Right.
Hello? Wait, which way am I supposed to go? There we go. Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, hi, everybody.
Nice to meet you on video. We've been emailing. I'm Virgil.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Hi.
This is, you want to introduce yourself? We'll start in like a couple minutes. We're
Sure.
live right now, but we're waiting for our host. He's having a little bit of computer issues. So maybe you can introduce yourself, Shoshone.
Yeah, that's expected right now. Yeah. These are so weird.
Hi, I'm
It's like,
Shoshone.
Hi. Shoshone?
Yeah, I'm one of the mental health therapists here at Two Feathers.
Oh, great. Nice to
It's
meet
so
you.
nice to meet you.
Yeah,
Hi,
I'm glad to be
Ellen.
here. Sorry?
My name's Ellen.
All right. Hi, Ellen.
I'm a college mentor at Two Feathers, and I'm just graduating with my undergrad.
All right. Nice to meet you. I'm glad you have your ear game. I didn't even think about it, but I always have earrings next to my desk, so it's okay then. Anyway. Yeah, I'm glad to be here today. So who's the host? Sorry, I didn't hear.
Well, either Charlie or myself. Charlie's also a college mentor. He's getting his master's at Humboldt State, but him and I have been doing a lot of these interviews. But you know, we have backup plans just in case. You know, there was a couple times where we couldn't even go online on Facebook, so that's why we get online about 7 minutes early.
No, that's
We
good.
do it pre-show, but I don't think we got to the pre-show this time.
Oh, no, that's good. Yeah, I don't know. This whole medium is so new. There's bound to be problems. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. It's well, because it's we go live through Zoom, through Facebook, but then you can have a backup plan to that, YouTube, because those are the two like mediums that allow to go live. So it's been a learning experience.
No, and I've been watching. They turn out really good when it can manifest, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a good opportunity to learn, and I think the community likes it. Here's Charlie. Here's our host.
Sorry about that. Hello. My name's Charlie. I'll be the host today.
Nice to meet
Kind
you.
of nice to meet you too. I'm just going to be the facilitator, open it up, facilitate questions from the comment section, and let the ladies kind of run today's show a little bit.
All right. Good.
I guess let's get started, Charlie. If you could do a little introduction, and then I'll introduce Terese, and then we'll go from there.
Right on. Welcome back, everybody. May the 4th be with you today. It's May 4th, so I figured keep up with the hipster type of title today. Monday, nonetheless, pretty beautiful day here in Arcata, Humboldt County area. So I hope y'all are enjoying the weather, but still practicing social distancing in some way or another. Today we have a pretty special guest that will be able to really dive into her book, Heartberries. So I'm really excited to hear from the author at hand. Very powerful narrative that is very representative of a lot of Indigenous women and women of color throughout the world. So really excited. And I'll throw it over to my colleague Virgil.
Good lunchtime. Hello, I'm Virgil Moorhead. I'm part of the Big Lagoon Rancheria, which is Yurok and Talawa, and I'm also the behavioral health director here at Two Feathers. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I'm really excited, really touched to have Terese on here with us today. I just finished her book, I have to be honest, this morning. But I read it, a couple of years or a year ago or so too, and it's been so moving to me. And so I'm tasked with introducing Terese, and so a little bit about her is that she is from the Seabird Island, British Columbia, on the Seabird Indian First Nation Reservation, and she's currently a tenured professor at Purdue University.
Tenured track.
Tenured track.
Not there yet.
Not there yet.
Mhm.
And she's also, as you can see behind me, the prolific author of the New York Times best-selling book, Heartberries. So welcome, Terese.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Hi.
And so let's, I guess, just get started right away. And so in reading your book and looking at some of your work with some of the interviews that you've done and just trying to get to know more who you are, my first question is sort of, what did you think would be the impact of your book, or who were you when you wrote the book, writing it for?
Yeah, I mean, always Indigenous people, but more specifically, I thought of people like my mother, who was radical and an activist and a poet and lived on a reserve where, she really gave herself to her community. And those value systems, I wanted to see that represented in a book that were also complicated. You know what I mean? So I did write it for my mother first, and then for my brothers second, which they had experienced a lot of trauma, and I had never really tried to talk to them about it. So I wrote about it, and that was the first time we ever talked about it, is when they read the book. So for a lot of people, but first my mother, second my brothers, and then third Indigenous people. And it's touched non-Indigenous lives as well. But, I think with that in mind, you always honor the people who matter. You know what I mean? That's first and foremost. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I think in reading your book, I think just it's going to make me a better lover to my partner. I think it's going to make me it's made me think more about just the complexity of who people are. And, I'm a psychologist, so I've been thinking about that, but just how authentic and real you were in that book has really, made me think these last couple of days, and I think it will continue to think about the importance of looking underneath the surface when trying to understand people, and just, sticking in there with people that may be struggling. And so I
Mm.
thank you for that. And I
Thank
know Shoshone has recently listened to the book and wanted to make some comments or ask a question.
Sure.
Yeah, throughout that journey of listening, I got it on Audible. I couldn't wait to sit down and just take it all in. And first of all, I'm so grateful for your story, and for your ability to share that with the world is a beautiful thing. And I don't think that maybe we even know like the impact that it has on breaking down stigmatism and being able to like give voice to Native women. And there were several moments throughout. I teared up, I cried, I laughed, and I reflected back on it several days after, for several days. So I see myself a lot in that story. So being able to work in the field and hear that authentic, beautiful story just means so much to the rest of us. And I just want to give you space to kind of reflect on that with us.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for reading the book. And thanks for being here today as well, to share that. Yeah, I honestly, when I wrote it, I was, from when I started it, I was writing in grad school and also in undergrad when I was applying to grad school. I was thinking about my father, who suffered with a lot of things like as a child, and he became an alcoholic, and my mother, who was a role model for me, but also complicated in that she had caused some damage regarding like intergenerational trauma and the cycles that we carry, So as I was writing it, I was thinking about mental health and the fact that I would go and feel unraveled and feel like, oh, okay, like I need medication, or I need healing, or I need, I need like my elders, and I need my community. But I was far removed in academia, and I didn't have access to good healthcare, and I didn't have access to our teachings, and I didn't have access to my mother anymore because she had passed away. So I felt like I didn't know what the outcome would be when I started writing about the truth of how sick I was. I knew that it was dangerous to say that as an Indigenous woman, because if you speak out and say, I'm not the best mother, I'm not the best provider, and I have a sexuality. If you say that as an Indigenous woman, it puts you in a really vulnerable spot. But I kept thinking, like, what if another Indigenous woman saw me say that? You know what I mean? Like how much that would mean to somebody else, because I didn't see a lot of that. So thank you for that. Thank you for witnessing, because that's a big part of my culture, is like, you're really nothing if nobody witnesses it, and bearing witness is a big part of the book. It's meant to be interactive. It's meant to carry a better legacy where we can talk about the things we've experienced, but also talk about recovery and healing next, Yeah.
So I'm curious that, you use the word healing, and I know you've talked a little bit about, and maybe some people had pushed back a little bit about you saying writing can be cathartic, and that, maybe part of you has healed through this writing process. And so I'm just curious, like, what has, been the impact on yourself, through this writing process. And for those of you that are maybe tuning in here right now that are writers or want to be writers, what is the impact of really jumping into such at an intimate level your own life history and family history?
Yeah, I think first, saying the thing, I couldn't say the thing out loud. So I couldn't say, oh, my father did this, or oh, I experienced this in my relationships, or I am the cause of pain. I couldn't say it out loud, but I could write it. And I couldn't necessarily write it to the people I hurt, but I could write it first just in a journal, And for me, that was healing because the book kept my secrets. It was like a book like this, like just a regular composition book. And that first act was transformative for me, just acknowledging truth, even if it was in a secret space. But then came the crafting of it, which, if I wrote a line that was like, oh, I don't feel good, and today's a bad day, and I don't like myself today. Like, the deeper examination that happened in crafting a book, which is, what does self-esteem mean, to Indigenous people? Well, first, we don't really talk about self-esteem. We talk about collective esteem, right? How to, overcome all these barriers together. So contemplating that about why I didn't feel good about myself was actually a plural question. So crafting the book made me think deeper about things, which can be more cathartic. It's one thing to say how you feel and what happened to you. It's another thing to have to craft it for a reader experience. And it kind of deepened my healing in a way. And I think the book that I wrote was quite angry, and it was melancholy and very sad. But who I am now is like, I think I'm really proud because my son, he had to explain who his mom was to somebody else. He said, she's silly. And I was like, I would never think that about myself, but it's true. I always, open his door and make a joke, or, I'm always trying to get him to see the bright side. And I think the book did that for me. It gave me a space to just purge everything. And then you can be silly, you can think about how to be present after you've named the most awful thing that you can't really speak,
And so is being silly, just as a quick follow-up, would another way of like thinking about that is also just being yourself
Yeah.
and being okay with all the complexities of who you are?
Yeah. I was so holed up in my trauma that I was doing group therapy, and, I wanted to sit next to the window. This is an example where, and then the counselor was like, Terese, what's going on in your head? Because I was obviously in my head, and I was like, I want to sit next to the window, but I know I only want to sit there for an hour. And if I move back to my seat, you'll think that I'm manic, or you'll think that I'm in a depressive episode, or that I'm trying to retreat. And then she was like, oh my God, Terese, just be yourself. Just stop thinking about what people think of you and just be yourself. So, it was like that process of healing. And it is true that when you're in your trauma, you're really isolated. You think you're very self-conscious. You blame yourself for everything you do. So moving away from that, it did make me more silly. Like, it made me want to dance. It made me want to be the human being who can go sit by the window and not think, how will somebody evaluate me? How will somebody think I'm, trying to isolate if I sit by the window and look outside too much? Like, if I feel like looking outside too much, I'll do it. And I think that's a good example of how I've changed over the years,
Yeah, it was really inspiring, just hearing you say that it really allowed you to be yourself is like, yeah, that's kind of like in my personal like healing journey. It's like I always I still have the tendency to like blame myself. Oh, that's my fault. And it's just like, not really. There's this, and this. And it helped me kind of like, all right, I am okay to like, and so I am a little goofier than I was, a year ago. And I, give that credit to my partner who's really strong and is like in her healing where she's like, she has, routines of like taking care of herself. And so that's like a contagious thing. And so that just kind of reiterates the power and strength that women have, especially Indigenous women. And, before we kind of hopped online here, we're kind of having a debriefing session of talking about what this story kind of meant to each one of us. And for me, obviously a man. And so it just reminded me of like powerful women in my life, my mom, my grandmas, you know, aunts, and how much this kind of spoke to, I'm sure it spoke to some of their experiences, but even more, you know, current now, it kind of reminds me of how my fellow colleagues and at work and at school kind of feel navigating this heteropatriarchal society. And I was just curious to see what kind of Ellen had to share with us today and how it kind of resonates with her, and if she has any questions that she might have.
Hi, I wanted to thank you again for coming. It's so exciting to see you here. When I was first reading this book, I saw that it got a lot of hype from like movie stars and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, she must be so amazing and she must be so professional. Because that's kind of like the stereotype or like the stigma that I have of Native women who are in these spaces, and they're just like recognized by a lot of people. And then I read your book and it made me feel like I could be more open about what's going on with my life, that I don't have to hide things to be considered like professional or to be asked to do work or be considered for like, you know, like things that usually mental health is stigmatized by. So people will be like, she's crazy, we probably don't want her helping kids. But that's what I do, and it made me feel like we go through a lot, and it helped normalize kind of mental health and being a professional. So it's like, I wanted to thank you for that. And also, I was wondering if there's ever like a time in your life where you were scared about that being like stigmatized by like mental health and like worried about your profession or whatnot after this book came out.
Yeah, I mean, because the book, I reveal I'm a mess. Like, I'm a mess, you know, and I have days where I have to unravel and I can't be professional. I have to call it in. And, you know, with mental health, being able to call it in and say, I can't do this today because I'm not well. There is a real stigma where people shy away from talking about it or being open about it, but it's so necessary that we have that time and the liberty to say when we are not capable. It's not an admission of failure, you know. But I have fears all the time, you know, but then I think an institution that will accept me, you know, is accepting the possibility for, you know, an Indigenous person who is not, number one, doesn't, you know, fit the mold of what we imagine when we think of like a professional Indian, right? Like we think they're palatable, they never cause much trouble, they don't necessarily, you know, participate in calling out, and they definitely don't talk about sexual violence. You know what I mean? So like there's all these things, and I'm like, well, if an institution takes me in, you know, they're definitely on board for talking about stuff like that. And working with Purdue has been really cool because that's post book, you know, that they took me on as a visiting professor and then tenure track. And when I say, ooh, this person said something that's racist, you know, we should talk about it, they're open to the dialogue, you know. And I think that's because I'm so visible in the public eye talking about real things, that they know what they're getting. You know, I think it's really important, you know, to accept yourself and kind of understand that, like, yes, we do have to navigate this professional world, but we also have to be ourselves, or else it's not worth it, you know. Because I did work for institutions where they asked me to be more silent or asked me to participate in like no call out culture, you know. And I knew, like, the person that I am, we do have to have a space where we can say, this is not acceptable, this is not right, let's protect our women, you know. So it's like this tough journey that every day you have to give yourself permission to like be yourself, and also walk a fine line where you can call it in. Because if I went to work those days where I couldn't, you know, if I went to work the days where I was unraveling, I would have ruined my career. You know what I mean? So I think it's really important people know it's okay to take that time for yourself. And I'm not saying that from a privileged position, because, you know, sometimes where I was committing myself or going to therapy, I was in the middle of submitting my MFA application, and I had to, you know, I was evicted when I got out of the hospital, but it saved my life. You know what I mean? And so it's a tough call. It's a tough world to navigate, but I think I'd rather be doing it this way than faking it, because, oh, I'm so bad at that anyway. I'm really bad at faking it, so yeah.
Yeah, so if one were to start writing their life's tale as a healing kind of way, is there like a process of going through at first, like getting that tough skin, or getting the mentality that I can do this, and what I'm doing is important to me, and, you know, so I feel like there could be a backlash if a lot of us started doing that, like opening up more. So what kind of was your process in that?
I guess I was negotiating what I could reveal without getting sued, you know, and what I could, you know, also, you know, as far as custody and things like that, I did have a custody battle where I write about it, losing custody of my child, which is actually, you know, a very familiar experience for a lot of single mothers, Indigenous mothers, who battle with CPS at their door just because they're poor. You know what I mean? So for me, I think I had to navigate, if I was going to write a story about, let's say if I was going to write my story about my ex-husband, right? Like, I had to negotiate what I could possibly say that was absolutely true, that my brothers and my mother and my family knew about at the time, who could corroborate my story, I mean. And then I had to prepare myself for the idea that what if he sues me, you know? But I needed to speak that truth because our dysfunction, how we both participated in that marriage, and I was 19 years old, you know, was not good. And I wanted to tell that story because I needed to see it represented, and I had to tell it true, which I took accountability there as well. But then when I told him, okay, because when Emma Watson put it on her book club, that's when I knew I had to tell my ex-husband that I wrote about him. So I told him, and, you know, we're not really on great terms, but he said, I'm glad you spoke your truth. And he left it at that. So I think there was a lot of growth on his end that I didn't even know about, you know. And then when it comes to, like, there are some people I don't write about, you know, because I haven't figured out our relationship yet. But when it came to my brothers, I showed them the book before I published it so that we were on good ends. And they learned things about me they never knew. So I would take it into consideration, like, that sometimes speaking your truth changes, like, the atmosphere in your whole world, like, and the people you interact with once they've read it. You know, down from my advisors, you know, who were working with me at that time that I wrote it, they think of me differently now. They understand me better. And I did upset some people, but those are not people I think it upset them for the right reasons, and I'm glad I did it. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's good to upset people. Sometimes it's necessary for change, you know? And then, yeah.
It seemed like being so open and honest really made yourself more truer to the world. And I feel like that's something that I could also benefit from. I'm pretty honest with my family just in general, but with my colleagues, I could be more honest, and they could somehow support me more if they knew, like, what was going on and things like that. But it seemed like your true self could actually be like shining through when we're kind of used to this whole like westernized society where we have to hide things and we have to be perfect. And just being honest and open makes you closer to yourself and your family and every person around you. And also, I think to like our culture and tradition, it's all about like respecting yourself and others. And so I think being open and honest was such an amazing thing for you to do and kind of portray for the rest of us, kind of like, I need to do that now. So yeah.
And it's a slow journey, you know, it is. It's a slow process because our immediate thoughts about what we're upset about usually aren't the truest to our spirit. You know what I mean? Like we might see something on Twitter or Facebook and we're like, I already know how I feel. I'm self-righteous about it. I'm going to share my opinion. But if you give it a few days and you actually pose some questions, why are you upset about this? Why is this hurting you? Why are you thinking about it today? Like, then you come to a deeper truth that probably more people will resonate with, you know? So it's like this long process of like learning the truth about yourself. It's often not that surface level reaction or feeling, you know?
And I have, all of us here on the panel with you are doing interviews are local native professionals of this area of Humboldt County. Shoshone's got a master's and is going to be becoming a licensed social worker. And Ellen just got into the social work department and so she's going to be getting a master's.
Congratulations.
Yes. And then Charlie is more environmental, but we're trying to pull him over into social work. And so like a big part of what we're doing is just trying to expose our community to different perspectives and different ways of looking at social work or mental health or just wellness. And so my question to you is, like, what do you see as your relationship with social work and therapists now? Like, because my take was it's maybe mixed. And so I'm just curious of like, what your thoughts are around the social work profession and therapists and yeah.
It's so hard because I was like the label, I had a file, like a big old file. I was at-risk youth, and then I was removed from my home. And then when I got out and aged out and moved back in with my mom, I was, then I became a young mother, which, put me on their radar at YASMES, which is the Native social work for Seabird Island Band. And, I have negative relationships, power dynamics, and then positive relationships where like, if I hadn't been removed from my home, I would have been stuck in a house where my mother's boyfriend was not safe, But then that said, the 4 houses that I lived in were iffy, not exactly safe. One of them definitely wasn't. A couple of them were, the men in the house weren't good. So, and I didn't write about that because I didn't want to give them any more attention than they deserved, But I also wanted to walk the line of like, when my mother died, the only person I could ask to help me get a new bed, because she passed away, in her bed. She had an aneurysm. And I moved into her house and I needed a new bed because I didn't want to sleep in the bed that she had died in. The first person, the only person I could ask was a social worker, and she helped me get the emergency funding to do that. And because she liked me, she gave me extra money to get things that I needed for my baby. So it's like, if I didn't have those things in place, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be as safe. I wouldn't be, I might not, I wouldn't be this person, But that said, it was like the power dynamic of having to go into your tribal office and talk to a social worker, or having to be there on Welfare Wednesday, that the power dynamic there and the stigma there was so real. And I I wish we could unravel that stigma and have real conversations with the people who are labeled at-risk youth and kind of aged out. And I wish we could, give them more of a voice and interaction on how things are handled. But that said, I'm far removed from social workers now. But it's also, I have such an appreciation for the few counselors and the few social workers who actually answered the phone when I called. That made such a difference in my life. It is mixed. Yeah.
Makes sense. Because a couple, times you wrote about the sort of ways that, or the questions that some of the therapists pose to you about, self-acceptance and taking sort of responsibility about how you feel, or just really asking questions that make maybe you look underneath the surface behavior. And sort of that's a big part, I think, of our work as clinical, like my work as a clinical psychologist, which is, that it's like an iceberg, right? The behaviors above the water, but then there's so much underneath. And so I just saw so much parallels with your book and you in this process getting underneath. And one of the reasons why I was so excited about today's interview, because and just me thinking about, man, I should write a book. I got a pretty complicated story too, but just the parallels of the writing the memoir and doing therapy. So that was kind of where my question was coming from.
Yeah, it is like an intellectual process is really similar to therapy, because you have to take, in memoir, you have to take like, 3 parts of your life or three themes and thread them together to one complete narrative, because it's not an autobiography, right? So therapy often gets you to look at individual things, isolate them, like your childhood, your relationships with men, and your children, right? Like they'll get you to look at 3 things and then thread them together for your own healing. So it was very similar. Yeah.
And just one more follow up on that is because one of the words that came up is like shame.
Mm-hmm.
And you sort of working through that shame. And for me, I think that if we look at like historical trauma and intergenerational trauma in the present, and not just to individualize it, but if there was an consequence at the individual level, I think it's often that shame that there's something inherently wrong with us as a person. And it seems like that was some of the work that you talked about and maybe have kind of come through on the other side, but still it's a journey.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think so too. It's, that's the other thing is like somebody could tell you it's not your fault, right? Somebody could say that, but to actually get you to inhabit that space of like, oh, I feel dirty, right? I feel dirty talking about this. And it's like, when you have a safe environment to talk about it, the more you talk about it, sometimes the worse you feel. But then you walk away from that, you can think objectively about all of the details, and it really, you come to the conclusive thought that it wasn't your fault. You know what I mean? So it's like, I really honor that journey for people where they do have to dive into the shame, because I think I do that every day to negotiate. Ooh, am I going to feel good today? Am I going to let myself feel good today? Am I going to be present and enjoy my life? And if I'm going to do that, I need to acknowledge some of the bad feelings that are, I think, haunting me sometimes every day,
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that your story has a lot of truth to it, no matter how you identify, and finding that truth within like the power of storytelling. Like I'm reading the comments and there's like a lot of people like, this is inspiring me to write my own story. Like and it just kind of sheds light on like a bigger problem is like, and everyone, like unfortunately, a lot of Native women are getting mistreated or misviewed, and especially when you do kind of need that little bit of assistance and WIC and CalFresh, and there's a stigma like, oh, I must have been a teenage mother, or a whole bunch of different associations where it's like, you know, you kind of start to believe that in some ways, like, man, I do, like, this is my fault. You know, what was I thinking? Or, you know, and that's not fair because there's a huge systematic problem that we're just kind of like left with. It's kind of like a hand that we're dealt. But also, like, there's still a lot of power and strength in that story and how inspiring it could be to like put it on paper, even if it's just a couple bullet points. This is what I caught. This is what kind of got me to think like this, and this is why. And it helps you kind of like disassociate it, like almost like narrative therapy, you know. And it kind of is. And you know, there's points where like I'll like draw and like you can see when I'm drawing really hard, like how angry or frustrated I am, and then when I'm drawing like lighter strokes, it's like, man, I must have been really calm then, or, you know, I was really listening, or whatever the thing is. And I think that's something that Indigenous people have kind of embedded in us. It's just like, how do you like kind of dust off that dust, you know, like get your brush out and just dust it off. And so I think that's something that's really powerful about books and about education. Although there are times where I'm like, man, now I know all this and now I have more triggers, or now I know why. It's like, dang, like, can I just find the comfort already? But I think that's just a part of it, you know, just kind of having that balance of happiness, but also there's a lot of grief too. It's kind of a part of life, and just kind of coming to that realization and being okay with it is really important for growth and how we pass that on to the next generations. And so I think that's something that your book is really good at, is just like, it's okay to be hurt, but it's, you just make sure you're taking care of yourself to where you feel those higher moments of life too. And so I really appreciate that insight and kind of leading by example in a lot of ways. And I think Shoshone had a good question for you as well.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I loved how you talked about in the post interview about how it came from pain and how it's okay to talk about pain because that's led you to love and to like greater emotions through that. And so I think that sometimes it's hard for Native people to like say like, okay, I'm going to talk about my pain, right? Because like in telling our stories, like we're going to get to that part and it's like, oh, you don't want to be the downer, or you don't want to be that person who continuously just brings that up. But changing that narrative to be like, no, like first we're going to start here, but like my story like goes in all these different directions and it embodies all these greater emotions as well that I would not have without that pain. So thinking about other people's perspective, I think this is why it's so powerful for us therapists to read the book, is because for one, I was the client on one hand growing up in that environment, and then now I'm the therapist and I get to listen to all these different stories. But even if the story doesn't have to have this shift to be beautiful, right? It can just be this gritty, like really raw story, and just listen to that is life-changing as well. So I'm wondering kind of for you, like what the follow-up from Heartberries is, and moving forward, kind of what you're working on now and where everything's going.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing, you know, I think the funny thing is I thought if I laid down all this, you know, this kind of like gritty story or all this pain and the ugly truth of my life, I thought at first when I was done the book and I sold the book and, you know, people were paying attention to me, I was like, I'm done now. And it's like, oh, I get to just, you know, enjoy new financial success, you know, having a job as a professor. But no, like the work doesn't stop, you know. And also as an Indigenous person, because of our mortality and illness and dysfunction and things like that, like people don't stop dying around you, which I wasn't, you know, I thought I could fix everybody. You know, when I came up, I thought I could throw money at problems and, you know, keep people alive that way, but it doesn't work that way, you know. And I have, you know, some survivor's guilt about that because I really thought, you know, things were just going to change altogether, but our our circumstances as Indigenous people do not change. That does not change. We still have a long road, even if we've gained individual success. You see the collective grief and the things we need to work on as a community and all that. So what's next for me is, you know, writing about recovery, how it's like a daily thing to recover from trauma, and writing about that I've lost 2 of my best friends in 2 years, you know, and writing about that too, which is, you know, I think it's beautiful that I had these sisters, you know, these women close to me, but it's also like important to honor that grief just culturally for me. So I'm writing about that, but I have a book of fiction working under contract with Doubleday Canada, because it's, you know, about growing up on Seabird Island. And that's more fun. Writing fiction is more fun for me because, you know, it's more imaginative in my mind, and I have less to honor in terms of like people in my life. I can just write for me, kind of. So I'm working on those 2 things, and I'm not sure if I'm doing it simultaneously or if I'm going to work on the fiction first, because, you know, I need that emotional break or what, but those are the 2 projects I have. So I'm excited about them.
I had a follow-up question to the writing process, and you know, we had Tommy Orange on here, and I asked him this question too. But my question is like, in this, you know, your time in becoming a prolific, extraordinary writer, like, what would your recommendations to the aspiring writers, like, what does it take to be, you know, as I see it, you are a very top-notch writer. What does it take, do you think, to be such a prolific writer?
Thank you. First, I think it takes honoring, if you're like, it takes honoring your weird. So like, if you're scared to speak it in the way you normally talk, if you're scared to write, you know, that line, you should push yourself to write it. You know, you should push yourself to speak in that voice that's individual to you, because it's really what's original about you that's gonna appeal to publishers and appeal to editors and agents, you know. So honor the weird thing about you, the thing maybe you're scared to reveal, because that's really what's gonna set you apart. But then the other thing is, you don't need an MFA to become a writer. You know, you don't need an education to become a writer. What you need is like practice. My mother wrote on a typewriter, an electric typewriter, every night. And, you know, I think what she needed was somebody to help her find a publisher, but she didn't need an MFA to become, you know, as well crafted as she was as a writer. But that said, the professionalization aspect is really important. And if we could collectively get something going for Indigenous people where they didn't need that university approach, but they could find avenues for workshops on how to submit your work as like to a literary magazine, or how to submit your work to an editor or publisher. I feel like that is something I'm looking into, you know, because what it takes is daily practice and kind of an analyzation of like on a line level what you speak and making it more you, I think. You know, so if I say, for example, I started my book about, you know, 6 years before it was published. And if I had a line like, you know, I miss my mother, the trajectory for that line took 6 years to just write a letter to my mother and put it in the book. Like saying, oh, I'm writing about how much I love my mother, how much I miss my mother. Why don't I just, from a craft standpoint, make it epistolary, where it's letter form, and say, I won't speak to you the way we spoke before, you know, because she was a poet and I was more practical. So that's how I started the chapter where I speak directly to her. But from a craft standpoint, it was like 6 years just to get to that point. So it's a daily effort, and it's honoring the originality inside of you already, you know?
And you mentioned your mother, and she was a sort of big part of the book, you know, and very sort of complex individual. And so, what do you think her thoughts, feelings would be about your book and career? Yeah.
I don't know, because she was so radical. So she would be proud of me, but she would be holding me accountable to, never write, always center my Indigenous identity first. And I miss that about her, that kind of like very radical approach of like, you don't need to do this for a white audience. You don't need to dim your light for anybody else. She was very empowered about making things specific for us as a collective. And she was very pan-Indigenous because, during the 70s and 80s, that was a whole approach. So I wonder about now how she would view like activism and Indigenous identity. So I know that she would be proud, but I think she would also hold me accountable in a way that nobody does anymore. I have to, I think we all hear our mother's voice in our heads when we do something bad. But I know my mom would have found way worse things about me than I find about myself. So, I miss her checking me, because she was really good at it. Yeah, I think she'd be proud. I just wish she was here. I also, I would have been showering her with vacations and presents. So maybe she, let it slide more that, I'm so public and I've done all, I don't know. I could go into it, about the fact that what public Native identity looks like and how sometimes we have to like sell out a bit to just play nice, because Q&As can be really offensive when I go out and I tour. And I know my mom would tell me, just tell them off, but you have to walk that fine line of like, it's not worth it, So,
Yeah, we have a question from the Facebook comments actually, and it's from Jolie, and it has to do with kind of like community and kind of what you're talking about is she asks, have you had to deal with your own people trying to silence you as well?
That was kind of always, so like Chief and Council supported my graduate school, like they funded my graduate school. But on top of that, it's like when you're a writer and you're writing about disparity and what it's like growing up on a reserve or a reservation, I always worry what Chief and Council thinks of me. They haven't done anything to silence me at all, but I'm like, ooh, I'm not saying all good things about res life, or I'm not saying all good things about Indigenous people. I'm talking about alcoholism. I'm talking about lots of things that maybe people wish I wouldn't talk about. And, I feel that genuine like fear, if that makes sense, of like, but I think the fear is good, if that makes sense, because it keeps me honest. So like, I know not to tell certain stories from our culture, like, or to talk about ceremony in a way that's exploitative or tells too much. So I'm lucky that nobody's ever been like, hey, you did this wrong, or hey, you shouldn't have written that. But I feel a genuine sense of looming fear of like, ooh, Chief and Council is watching, and if I mess this up, I could mess up my cousin's getting funding, or you know what I mean? Like it goes that deep. So I don't know.
Yeah, I totally feel that, like, if you should be saying like controversial things and whatnot, like, is this gonna mess up like funding for the trial for anyone? Like,
that's real. That's real. And on top of that though, if you choose to be a writer, you have to inhabit that space of being a disruptor. Because after, I published the book, one of my friends, she experienced, her child was hurt by somebody in the same like band that I'm from, you know, and opening up a dialogue with community members in my own nation was my duty because she told me to do it. She said, you know, Terese, you know, can you write to this health worker about what happened? And so I took it on myself to do that. But that work is not easy. But when you become a writer and a storyteller, sometimes you'll be asked by your own community members to carry stories that maybe you don't want to carry, that will make people uncomfortable to tell. But it's really important to do that work if you inhabit that identity in your community as a storyteller, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And like, if the greater world didn't know that like things are happening in our communities, we probably wouldn't get that coverage and we wouldn't get that support. Kind of like in Standing Rock, even though that didn't turn out the way we wanted. And the same with Flint and them not having any water, that's still not turning out the way we wanted. But there's also been some good things from coverage. So yeah, I worry about that too. Like, especially being on this Facebook live feed and whatnot, letting the community listen to us.
Plus, people are going to find something wrong in your own,
always,
especially your own, because they knew you when you were a weirdo without friends. Like, because I was bookish and not popular. So like, but the people who used to bully me now like me. So that's a plus, you know? So there's always community dynamics, and it's just amplified when you're more public, but it's the same thing that you dealt with, like, you know, earlier in your life.
Yeah. And it like how I was talking about earlier, like every person has their own normal. Like there's no such thing as normal. Whatever you do is your personal normal. That's what I try to express with my kids, my mentees. They think I'm perfect because I'm in school, and they think I've never made a mistake because I have good grades and whatnot, and I'm like wearing nice clothes and things like that. And the easiest way to get them to open up to me and to like respect me as an individual is to talk about those things that I've been through, and to let them know that I'm not a perfect person and you can be open with me. We can all be like imperfect people together, you know? I think that's really healing just for myself and the kids, and then reading this book too, especially, it kind of like echoes that.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, you know, if you inhabit a messy space of like, I'm not perfect, people open up more, you know, people feel more comfortable because it's really not normal to be that professional, perfect, public native, you know, that's more palatable, but it's not real, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I feel like bringing it back into like our social work and mental health, that's one thing that I've noticed. Before I came back home, I was at Stanford as a staff psychologist, and when I was seeing some of those college students, I felt like I had to be like professional, don't say anything about me. And now that I'm working back up in my own community on the Hoopa reservation primarily, I find myself, the more I self-disclose about who I am in my own messiness, the more I'm connecting with the kids, that they're able to, you can just see them like relax when I say like, you know, I used to struggle with drugs and alcohol and was really, you know, in the depths of suffering and, you know, suicidal ideation and all that. And when I do that, I feel like there's more connection. And I don't know if there's research there probably is some research on this, but I really resonate with that.
Have you had that experience, like within your book opening up and then other people opening up to you that you like never thought that would happen? Like you talked about your brothers, but was it like other unexpected things too?
Yeah, because when I do readings, sometimes people I would never think would be tearing up or something. Like, you know, when I was in Montreal reading, this older white gentleman came up and he was in tears. And he had just never seen somebody talk about childhood trauma, you know, in a literary sense. Like, so he held my hand and it was really tender. And, you know, I've had Native men come up to me and say, I would like to be vulnerable. You know, I would like to work on my vulnerability. And they're, you know, very like reserved as I knew them, like friends from my MFA and stuff like that. So that's been refreshing for me, because I always thought these men are viewing me as a problem, or why is she talking about that? We shouldn't be talking about that. But seeing men especially show up has been good for me, because I always knew, you know, if I talked about that, some Indigenous women would be relieved, you know, but as far as men, I had no idea, you know.
Wow. Are you like, we know we talked about like what you're doing next, but you were talking about like a workshop. Are you thinking about doing like Facebook Live workshop?
I am. I just think we need to create all these new spaces, especially because we're all at home, like, you know, and I know like Tommy and I had always talked about doing something away from academia, where we could do it at a casino, where we would have workshops, you know, and it would be in the casino. And we really want to do that, but you know, right now because of the pandemic, that's been put on hold. And you know, I'm talking to other indigenous writers and asking them if they would want to collaborate, because I think, you know, collaboration is key, right? Like we're stronger together. So I'm like thinking about a lot of things, but I need like all of us to stop procrastinating and just do it. That's a big part of our work, is like when we really commit to just doing it, we can get so much done. But so often we have these great ideas and we're just like, let's wait until the perfect moment. It never comes, you know. I mean, look at what's going on now. Like, you know, nobody could have predicted that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's making it really hard to open up with our kids, especially over phone. Like, I'm sure we could definitely learn from more writing and from your book, and like how to use our words correctly with our kids, because we have to talk to them over phone. And it's really hard trying to connect like that. But I'm sure we can learn a lot from you and from your words too.
Yeah, if we ever do the casino residency, I'll hook you guys in so you can promote it. Yeah.
That would be really awesome to be a part of in one way or another. Kind of on a lesser serious fun note, kind of, you know, something that we asked Tommy Orange is like, at what moment did you feel yourself be that little kid again? Like, dang, I'm really about to go talk to this person, or I'm really going to do a famous person thing. I think that's always fun for me to like hear and engage with.
Well, I saw Tommy's where he was like, it was when I was going to be on the Daily Show, and his son and my son were playing on the Switch, and Trevor Noah came in, and he came in and talked to all of us, and the kids just ignored him. Like the kids didn't care that Trevor Noah was there. So that was one. And, you know, I guess the second one was when I was on PBS NewsHour and I did this little, you know, segment, like a 2-minute segment, and Kevin Bacon tweeted at me. He doesn't follow me, but he just tweeted, "Oh, that was good." And I was like, oh my God, Kevin Bacon. So yeah, I mean, you know, I think also just knowing Tommy, seeing his trajectory for like his magnificent career, and how like he fills up in Montana. I think there was like 1,000 people there. Like seeing that gives me like, oh my God, like I know this famous writer, and we started out just hustling, just like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to become teachers? How are we going to finish a book? So that was a big moment for me, seeing him like sell out, you know, in places. It gives me a lot of hope for all of us.
I appreciate you sharing that with us. Like I said, it really gets the little kid in me like, oh man, that must have been so exciting.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's so available. Like I really believe in our capabilities and our excellence as Indigenous people to succeed in this life. And so never dream small, always, you know, hold hope, because I used to be in my bathroom mirror pretending I was being interviewed. And, you know, that helped me. later in life when I'm doing real interviews on TV, so always dream,
I appreciate that. I take
Yeah.
that for sure. And that's what's cool about the speaker series is like, before I'm like, oh my God, this famous person. And then like all my anxieties are relieved. Just like, oh yeah, they're a real person. I can
Yeah.
relate. They're awesome. And so I appreciate that. And it's always like with humbleness and like respect. And that's something that I always find myself thinking too much about. It's like, man, what if they're just like, what is he even talking about? But it just kind of gets back to like, we all have something really compelling to share, something like other people can learn from. And that's something that I always think about. Like, that's why I asked that question, because like, man, I think about that moment all the time and just waiting for it kind of thing. And it makes it seem more feasible hearing it. Like, yeah, it's crazy. I never thought of it. And that's what I like about the speaker series. It really gets me like, there's a lot of hope, I feel like, coming in, especially when it's like we're in a global pandemic and I'm so hopeful. Like, that's crazy,
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. Like, hope is so rare right now, but like, what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to do but try to carry some hope right now? Like, or try to get people to feel better by like open communication and reaching out to people, staying connected. I feel like, we really have to be doing that right now, because times are really bad, Yeah.
Definitely it heightens the need to be verbally communicative for sure. Because oftentimes I'm like, just give me a hug. I don't know how to express myself right now, but now that I can, I'm like, really love you. This is what you do for me. Like, you got to be like explicit, and it really goes a long ways, and it gets you in a good habit of just like being communicative, and how much that influences healthy relationships too. So I think that's something that I'm taking from these times. Anyone else have anything to say?
Yeah, I had a follow up. I see we're winding down, Terese. So one of the things that I took from your book, as we've talked about, is that individual self exploration and being honest and really getting to understand yourself and your flaws, but also your beauty and your strengths. And another thing that I took that, maybe we haven't talked so much about, but what I think Charlie was just talking more about is this how to love, how to really care about others, how to develop in yourself that capacity for intimacy and love. And so I'm wondering, like, how is that? I think we read it on the pages, or the print in your book, that process with Casey, and so I'm just wondering, like, because I think that's also a big part of what we're trying to do at Two Feathers in our work with youth and families, is how to develop community and how to think about others genuinely, not for, I'm going to get something out of you. I'm going to, give you this money so you could have sex with me or use you, right? But really genuine love and compassion and kindness for others. So I'm just curious, like, for you to kind of or speak about that process for you, because it seems like towards the latter part of your book, you started to really develop a deep capacity to love other people, not just your husband, but also your children.
I think it came from, understanding that I was always going to be a little different being Indigenous, and I was always going to be a little different in my relationships with everybody, because for me, therapists were always telling me to become independent. They would see my relationships with people and they'd be like, oh, you're codependent, like you're too, and in my later 20s, I realized, like, I'm not codependent, I'm like interdependent. I want to be myself. I want to have a career. I want to have money, but it's nothing if I can't bring my brother with me, if I can't have a partner who is equal to me. And that's okay to acknowledge. That helped me love. And the second thing is learning how to apologize. I'd never seen my mother apologize, like, ever. I think one time she admitted that she shouldn't have said that, but she was never like, I'm sorry, made eye contact and said, I'm sorry for doing that, so I do that with my son, and it's helped me learn to love people in a more real way, where they are holding my vulnerability in their hands and they don't push it away. they don't hurt it. Like when I apologize to my son, it doesn't give him power. It gives him like, yeah, you shouldn't have done that, Mom. And then he loves me more because he knows he can trust me. So like, yeah, because I had always seen apology as giving somebody power, but it isn't. It's like being real and trying to love somebody in a realer way. So those were two things that helped me. I'm still learning how to love people, you know, because it is like every day you have to think about, sometimes you're triggered by your trauma and you're back to square one. Admitting that helps me love people too. Yeah.
And just a follow up is, do you borrow from any of your own cultural teachings from the community that you grew up in? And, you know, because I think one of the things for our community, we have teachings, we have principles of you know, respect, of healthy relationships that are embedded in who we are as Native people. So I'm wondering if that is also has been part of your journey, you know, in your own sort of background as a Native person.
Yeah, I mean, there are some things that I think about, like, you know, especially with grief, I think, oh, like, our people didn't call them burials, they called them plantings. You know, and learning that helped me view things differently as far as like, this is not the final space that we inhabit as people. But then there's other teachings like, you know, I think the idea of humility, you know, coincides with my vulnerability as a person. And also sharing, you know, that's one of our teachings, is that like, take what you need is our saying. And I always think about that when I'm feeling a little greedy, or I'm like, oh, I really want to make a lot of money and buy a house. I think about, well, you know, am I taking what I need right now? You know, but there's lots of little teachings like that growing up were always there because I had elders in my life that now I'm trying to like re-inhabit. And it's interesting because Diana Kay, she used to teach me, and when I was doing young adult education, and she's from where I'm from, and she's like doing all this language work and she's doing all this recovery work. And she was like, there were 7 teachings before colonization. And, you know, I've retrieved one of them, which is kindness, which in our language doesn't just simply mean kindness, of course, right? But she's working on recovering all those teachings, and I'm really excited to see what she renders. Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to make sure that that connection comes back. You know, it's definitely valid that that process is different for a lot of different people, communities, but just understanding at some point that will happen. Is just, you gotta really be compassionate for yourself and others to get there, you know, and to trust that they'll get there at their time. And so really powerful stuff that comes from within our culture, our cultural teachings, practices, and the way that we're expected to kind of carry on in the natural world that we live in. And so I really think that's a beautiful thing to think about. And, you know, something that I've been asking a lot of the speakers that come on here is, if you could summarize Native peoples, Indigenous peoples in one word, what would that one word be?
I think my first reaction is like fire, like we're amazing. Like I'm so proud when I see us really going off, or really getting angry, or really being happy. Like when we can rekindle that fire and make it own ourselves, I feel like that's so beautiful. So it's like fire. I think we're hot.
I love that. There's so many ways that you can interpret fire too, you know, so I think that's another kind of hidden concept that comes with that. I really like that. That one might be my favorite so far.
Right.
I appreciate that one. Any last thoughts, ladies, gents?
Do you have like a Twitter or Instagram that I can
Yeah,
follow?
I do. I think it's T Marie M
Okay.
on Twitter, and Terese Marie M on Instagram. And sometimes it's book content, and on Twitter especially, I give what I teach in my classes. I try to make that information transparent. So that's really what my Twitter's about. You know, Facebook's just for gossip, I guess. It's just for It's just for, oh, that person did that. Let me talk about it openly. But yeah.
I just want to thank you for having this wonderful dialogue with us today. It was super exciting. I was like, I hope I don't fangirl out too much
No,
on this
this is
interview because I've been looking forward to it. But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
All
thank you
right.
again. And all right, thank you all for tuning in today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I think there's a lot to learn from these type of interactions with some powerful people. And also tomorrow we're going to have another great segment with news from Native California. And so be on the lookout for that announcement and flyer. We'll be here ready for y'all. Hopefully we have some good music tomorrow to start us off right. I apologize today for showing up a little late, but I guess that's a Monday for you. Other than that, y'all have a good week and Two Feathers is out.
Thank you.
Bye.